guys, I'm back. I'm really sorry about that. A little bit of a technical hitch, not quite sure what happened there, but I'm now hopefully broadcasting on Simpkin Nutrition, my Facebook page. If I am, can you just give me a thumbs up to make sure that you're actually there? I'm so sorry if you've been hanging on in there. I did start on my personal profile, but it's all hopefully looking good now. If you missed it, I'll just keep recapping all the way through. Don't worry, it's not a problem. What we're doing first of all is I'm making chicken fajitas. I'm making the marinade first, and then I will show you how to make a vegan alternative as well. It's the same marinade in this dish. It's accidentally vegan if you want it to be, so you don't have to make chicken. You can make it a vegan alternative. So, you missed me popping in the tomato puree, which is what's going to give this marinade its colour, and also smoked paprika. It's a very pungent, strong smell, so you don't need as much of that. But what I am also going to use is 2 teaspoons of cumin. Cumin also gives that sort of traditional, I mean, it's used in so many different cuisines, but it definitely lends itself to Mexican food. One thing I like to add is dried oregano. I think the combination of the herbs with the strong cumin and paprika works really well. And I like to put a good tablespoon of that in. The flavour comes through, but it's not that strong, so I think it makes a big difference. And then finally, rather than using fresh garlic on this, because we're going to be frying it up and I don't really want the garlic to be a strong flavour, I'm going to use some garlic granules. It's not something I use very often, but it's definitely worth keeping those in the cupboard, because when you do want them, they give that garlic flavour without the actual garlic that can sometimes burn and needs to be cooked off to make sure you've got a more subtle flavour. So I'm going to mix that in with some rapeseed oil. Now you might ask why I'm not using an olive oil. It's quite simple. I really don't want the olive oil flavours to come through. I want the flavours to be the cumin, the smoked paprika, the oregano, and I don't want to cloud that with a flavour of an oil as well. And a rapeseed oil is a really lovely, good all-purpose oil to use that doesn't have a strong flavour, and you can fry with it, so you can use it at slightly higher temperatures. So you've effectively got a paste here, and that is your fajita marinade. We do need to season that, so with a bit of salt and a little bit of pepper, not too much because everything else has much more flavour. Now, one of the reasons that sometimes something like this isn't as flavoursome as you want it to be, it's quite simple. You just need to make sure you season very well. If you don't, then if you don't keep seasoning all the way through, so right from now, from the marinade as well as towards the end, you're not going to get that depth of flavour. So I think adding in the salt at this point really makes a difference. Okay, so the marinade is done. What I want to do is now make the chicken. So I've already started with the chicken, but the reason I've kept one behind is I want to show you how I'm cutting it into lovely thin strips. So you know when you've got them in the tortilla roll, you don't want big chunks of chicken, you just want little thin strips. So the way to do it is to cut this in half so it's not as thick as a normal chicken breast, okay? And then you're literally just cutting it into strips. Very easy. I don't like them to be too long. I think it's easier if they're sort of manageable strips, because otherwise they just end up falling out. So just keeping them in manageable strips. Okay, so you've got that there. Keeping that separate, because whenever we're using things separate, and wash my hands immediately after. Okay. So, the chicken is cut into strips. Literally, I'm just going to add that into the marinade. And then, just make sure it's really, really well coated. Now, you'll notice that the marinade was quite thick. on purpose. So I didn't add any more oil. I've also not added any lemon because I want those flavors to come through from everything else. I'm also going to be making a guacamole salsa for you. That's where I want all the extra flavor. And I want this chicken to be a little bit more dry, if you like, so that it isn't sloppy with the sauce, because I want it flavored with a marinade, not really in a sauce. So you can do this as early as you like. I mean, I did say earlier that you can just make it immediately, and yes, you most certainly can. But if you do think about it earlier in the day, and even the night before, even a day or so before, this really benefits from having that extra time for those flavors to really infuse. But they're strong flavors, so you will still get the flavor. So it's not a problem. So don't worry if you haven't planned and you haven't sort of prepped that one. Okay, so now I have already made another marinade, because what I'm going to do is do exactly the same using mushrooms. So whenever you're thinking about a vegan meal, you always have to think about where your protein is going to come from. You need to include protein in. It's important for even non-vegans to think about where the protein's coming from. Protein is so important. But apart from anything else, it's actually protein that fills you up. So if you eat a meal that's got good levels of protein, you're going to feel satiated, you're going to feel good. Now, the reason I'm using mushrooms is that mushrooms are in fact a source of protein. They're a vegan, a vegetable source of protein. So we're going to be using them almost instead of the chicken here. So I'm going to cut them into thick slices because I don't want them to disintegrate, and I want them to be, I suppose, a little bit meaty is really what I'm looking for. So lovely thick slices. I'm being quite generous here, and to be honest, I would say that is probably enough for one person. So if you've got lots of you, or what tends to happen is that the non-vegans often want to try that as well, not a problem, and you can just make more. So exactly the same, just going to coat the mushrooms in exactly the same marinade. Now the thing with mushrooms is that they absorb the marinade, and you can see already that does look quite dry, but don't worry, it's not a problem, because once we start frying it, the moisture from the mushrooms will come out and they won't be dry at all. But so right now, this is absolutely fine. Again, if you've got a little bit longer, definitely advance, but not a problem if you don't have any longer. Okay, so I'm going to get going with cooking, because what I want to do is get the chicken cooked while I then prepare the vegetables. Okay, so again, I'm using rapeseed oil, and I'm using a really good sort of frying pan that has an even heat. You've all probably got your favorite frying pan, and there's certainly one or two in your cupboard that you know when you use, you get a really lovely even cooking. So it's so much easier when you're cooking like this to make sure that you've got a great frying pan. So if you've just joined me, I'm making chicken fajitas, and I'm also going to be making a vegan equivalent, or vegan alternative, I should say. And I'm doing the vegan alternative with mushrooms, so I've just marinated those in a fajita Mexican marinade, and this is the chicken that I've marinated in the same marinade. And the marinade was tomato puree, cumin, smoked paprika, garlic pepper, and a little bit of rapeseed oil. So now I'm going to start frying the chicken, and you can hear that sizzling a little bit. So I'm going to separate those strips, because I don't want clumps. And then at the same time, I'm going to cook the mushrooms as well. So although I want them lovely and browned, I don't want them burnt. And it's very difficult sometimes to get that right. So what I'm going to do is start off at high heat, make sure that I get everything sealed, and the same with the mushrooms, and then we'll turn it down because I want those flavours to infuse a little bit more. So that's looking good. Oh, it smells amazing. I tell you, the combination of the smoked paprika and the cumin is fantastic, and that's where so much of the flavour is, which I think you're going to really love. And when it's that flavoursome, just makes the whole meal really enjoyable because you feel as though you're having something really tasty, and you know, it's going to be a winner. I think it just appeals to all ages. Not necessarily like spice, but they want flavour. Okay. So, mushrooms. And again, just going to just bring those a bit closer to you. They look great, don't they? So these were lovely big mushrooms. If you had smaller ones, not a problem at all. And we're just gonna... Okay, so while that's cooking, I'm gonna get going with the onions. I want them in thick slices. You've got two ways of doing it. So you can either do it the traditional way, where you are cutting the onion in half and then doing it in traditional rings. But I personally prefer to do it in thick slices and go in at an angle. And then as you get to the middle, you just turn it over and carry on. And I think that is really nice because I don't want the onions to disintegrate. So when I'm frying them, I want them to be a little bit more whole because that's fun and it's a nice way of eating it. I've got 1 clove of garlic. I'm only going to add that to the mushrooms because I think if you're not using meat, we need to try and just find ways of just adding a little bit more flavour. Even though we've got enough flavour from the marinade, I think with the mushrooms, having that extra bit of garlic can make a difference. But it's entirely up to you. So I'm going to add that in now. You can see how, even though it was quite dry to start with, the oil is coming out. And now we're literally going to make sure we actually fry it. Okay, so I want it to actually fry rather than just cook in its own sauce. And again, here with the mushrooms, same again. I'm going to turn that down a bit because I don't want the garlic to burn. And now do the peppers. A lot of red in this meal, so I'm choosing a yellow pepper and a green pepper. Okay, so it's entirely up to you, whatever you've got. Now, don't worry if you can't remember everything I'm doing. I'm going to be posting this recipe on my website, so you've got all your quantities and you'll know exactly what you're doing. So I'm just going to cut that into, again, reasonably thick slices, but not, you know, big mouthfuls. I'll just take away some of that white. You can see that I'm quite relaxed about, you know, removing just the stalk because the rest of it is actually quite edible. I'll just take that piece off as well and then just pick that out, take off some of the pith. Cut it in half because this is quite a big one, and then into thick strips. Last one. Now, you can never have too many vegetables. So this is, I don't want you to think of this as a garnish. I want you to think of this as part of the actual meal. So if you're trying to reach your, what we call the sort of 7 a day, so it's not 5 a day, it's 7 a day, you want to make sure that it actually counts. So this way, if you're making sure you've got good quantities of vegetables, that will count. Now, the colours make a difference. So we've got the yellow, and now we're also going to do green. And that will count as 2 different vegetables. So if you're trying to tot up to 7, 10 a day, then actually this will help you reach that. Now, the other thing that will help you reach it is these onions. So do not ignore onions. They are amazing. And they're anti-inflammatory, they're high fiber, and they do mean that you can bump up your vegetable count very easily. But again, make sure you really focus on enough quantity. Okay. That's really starting to look lovely now. It's a little bit sticky, a little bit browned. Just going to keep it going for a tiny bit longer and then just turn it off. Okay? And the mushrooms, again, probably left those on for a tiny bit as well as the mushrooms. So I'm going to turn that down because I want the moisture to come out of those mushrooms and start cooking. Okay, so then finally, I'm going to turn those all off. And then finally, I've got a slightly bigger one here. I think we're going to need it. We're going to fry up the vegetables. Okay, so again, some rapeseed oil. And this is and we will put the onions in to start with, and then the peppers. I'm not adding anything except salt and pepper here because I think we've got enough flavour going on with the marinade from the mushrooms and the chicken, and also the guacamole that I'm just about to make. Okay, because I think if you've got all of those flavours, we've got enough going on. So I'm going to keep that separate. What you could do, if you know you're either going to be eating vegan or chicken, is you could actually add the onions to either the mushrooms or the chicken. So you don't need to do them separately. But obviously, if you want to keep them separate, then it's very easy to do. Okay, so just wait for that. And so I'm now going to make a guacamole. And this guacamole is going to be a combination of a guacamole and a tomato salsa. I think it's so much easier just to make one bowl with everything in. So rather than tomato salsa, which has similar ingredients to the guacamole, or the avocado guacamole, I quite like to put them all in, and then it's so much easier at the table where you've only got one thing to actually top your chicken or mushrooms in. So, and this is where I just hope that the avocado lottery doesn't let me down. So I'm opening this. They felt good, I must say. So I'm hoping, oh, that's amazing. So I'm thrilled with that. Let's see what this one looks like. It's always a lottery, isn't it? You just never know. That one's not so good. So I'm not going to waste that. But for today, because what I'll do with that one is just take out the bits that are really good. Make sure I keep an eye on this. So I'm doing the onions first, and then I'm going to add the peppers, but we've got plenty of time. Okay, so then I'm just going to scoop out that avocado. It's probably a tiny bit hard, but it's very difficult, isn't it, to know exactly whether it's going to be good or not. So I'm just going to grab the fork. And it's a case of mashing that. I'm going to have to use the knife a little bit just to start that off. Okay, so avocado guacamole is simply avocados and onions, garlic and lemon. So the first thing I'm going to do is add the lemon. It's the lemon that stops it from turning a brown colour. So the quicker you can add that in, the better. So I'll keep mashing that. Let's add this in because then I can use this chopping board. Okay, so just give that a stir. And this this is great just to keep this going while you're doing everything else. So it's just a question of time with that. And now, the tomatoes. The thing about the tomatoes is you want them to be really, really finely diced. You don't want big mouthfuls of tomato. So I'm going to just cut that into very thin strips, and then again into tiny diced pieces. Now this is an easy job to give somebody else to do because it takes a little bit of time, it's a little bit fiddly, but it's not hard, and it's lovely to be able to involve you know, maybe older children with a sharp knife, or friend or partner. So, how's that looking so far? Is that doable? Do you think you could do that? It's not too difficult? I hope not. So, just one more. Now, depending on whether you like tomato or not, you know, you could obviously so easily add in more tomato, but I think it's a fine line, because if you do like tomato, then I would actually make this as a tomato salsa separately. But for this, I'm going to just add it all in together. I'm going to give that a bit more of a mash. Okay. This could definitely be a little bit softer, but that's fine. I'll just do that with a knife, and then it will end up as a chunky avocado guacamole. Okay, so we add in the tomato. Same again for the onion. It needs to be very finely diced. So really, really close slices, and then very tiny dice, because you really don't want big pieces of onion as you're eating. Red onion, I think, is lovely aesthetically. It's really nice to have that sort of red coming through as you eat that with the green and the red. And I think the more colour you add to your meal, the more it just is appealing and fun to eat. Okay, so we've got avocado, tomato, onion and lemon. So then what we're going to do, we are going to add raw garlic. Too much, because if we do, that flavour is going to be really strong, and I think that can be overpowering. So again, this is where we've got to make it really tiny, finely chopped. I would just spend a little bit longer on this one, just to make sure, because again, you want the flavour, but you don't want big chunks of garlic. And I wouldn't use any more than one, and one small one at that, because when it's raw, it's quite overpowering. So you don't really want that. If you don't like that flavour, this is where you can also use the garlic granules as well. A little bit of salt. Let that come out. A little bit of pepper. Not too much. And mash that in. Now, you've got alternatives here. You can add some yogurt, and that would make it obviously not vegan, but it gives it a slightly different texture. I'm going to leave that out because I think it just makes it more flexible for you. And I'm actually going to use the yogurt when we come to build the fajita, because then I think you've got more control over it. Right, so that's done. Get rid of that. Wash my hands. So we're almost there. So does this look like something that you would at home? I hope so. Now, these could definitely do with a little bit longer, but because I don't want to keep you on here for any longer while these cook, I'm going to use them, but they could definitely do a bit longer. And the other way that you can also do that is in the oven. So you can pop them into a bowl and But once you've sliced them, put them into a bowl, put some salt and pepper and some oil, so rapeseed oil again, and then just lay them out onto a large baking tray and pop them into the oven. They can be doing in advance, and then you can just freshen them up when you come to serve. Okay, so I've got a tortilla here that I've covered with a little bit of kitchen towel that's slightly wet because I just want to make it a little bit more flexible, but it's just so that it's easier to work with right now when I'm showing you. But obviously if you warm it like that with a little bit of water, it is going to be a lot easier. So we'll do the chicken one to start with. And got that lovely chicken with all the juices. Now, as I say, I do think this would benefit from a little bit longer, but we're not far off. So again, we want to make sure we can actually taste the onions, taste the peppers. So we're not far off, but at least this way we've got something to use so I can show you. Let's get another yellow one in. Okay, keep going with that. Little bit of the guacamole. Pop that over. I think having the fresh flavours works so well with this. And this is where you can add the yogurt as well. This is Greek yogurt, but you can add any yogurt you like. It doesn't matter. And then, this is always the fun bit. So this is how I do it. You've probably all got your own methods, but we've got to seal off the bottom and then just bring the two sides together. And there you go. And that's it. So that is your chicken fajita. Just going to pop that over here. And then we do exactly the same. Just grab another tortilla. Exactly the same with the mushrooms. Okay, so again, lots of lovely vegetables. Maybe a little bit more generous with the vegetables, but you know, it's just, this is down to personal preference. And this, no yogurt, and again, just turn over one side and bring the two sides together. Okay, so there you have it. You've got two, they're coming apart, but hey, and you've got two different, you're non-vegan, I reckon it's definitely worth trying both. So thank you so much for watching. I'm going to put this recipe up on my website so you'll have a good idea of the quantities I use, but the lovely thing about this recipe is you can just add in those ingredients. It isn't really a strict exact science to how much you use, as long as the flavours are right. The one thing I would say is just be careful with the smoked paprika because that is strong, but other than that I think you're good to go with the flavours that we've used. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you think it's something that you might try, please do put a thumbs up in the comments or ask me any questions. I will have a look at them afterwards, and I'll look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a lovely weekend.